Love and marriage in America. Nothing tells us about where we are as a culture and a country like love and marriage. And so we're going to talk about some interesting findings about love and marriage today on Bucky Kennedy Podcast. Love and marriage in America. Every time I say that, I start thinking about this old TV show when I was coming along called Love American Style. Yeah, it was. It was there. So, but anyway, I watched it. But I digress on this show. Hey, there are some 8 facts about love and marriage. Pew Research did a recent survey, and they're pretty interesting. And I thought we'd just kind of talk about 8 facts about love and marriage in America today. The first thing right out of the box is that we recognize is that half of Americans ages 18 and older were married in 2017, a share that has remained relatively stable in recent years, but is down 8 percentage points since 1990. So marriage, although it's steady, it's declining. I don't know how you relate that. And fewer people are getting married. And it's what interested me is half Americans 18 or older were married in 2017. One of the things I get asked all the time is, how old should you be when you get married? My answer is, that depends. I'm not one of those guys that thinks that older is better. I think that different people have different ideas what happens. Matter of fact, the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 7, that it's better to marry than to burn. Meaning, hey, if you can't control your passions for sex, you need to get married. And let me tell you why I think that's important. And it also tells us how much that God made sex for marriage. And that he intends that, because he says, listen, it would be better for you to go ahead and get married than to have sex outside of marriage. So I think that gives us that deal. So I'm one of those people that thinks that, if you're 18 and you found the love of your life or whatever, and you love Jesus, they love Jesus, I'm okay with that. And parents, sometimes we become our children's worst enemy at times. Well, no, we're going to have to wait. I'm not going to pay your way through college. Well, let me just ask this question. College is going to be difficult. It would be, but if you were going ahead and paying their way through college, why wouldn't they go ahead and get married and work their way? We had friends in college. I had friends in college that were married. They got married right out of high school and they went to college. Was it tough? Yes, but they're still married. They're still doing well. I just think that sometimes we put our children in positions that are tough to handle at times. So I'm not advocating marriage at 18, and I'm not advocating marriage at 25. I'm saying that we need to really just think about the situation, circumstances, and the people, and seek the Lord on those things and get it done. Here's the second thing that comes up is why people get married. Why people get married. The number one reason is love. Number 2 is making a lifelong commitment. Now, here's something interesting. So love doesn't necessarily translate into a lifelong commitment. That's an interesting thing right there. I would think it was. Number 3, companionship. 4 is having children. 5 is a relationship recognized in a religious community. In other words, we want to get married because that's the conviction of the community that we live in. Financial stability in 28 is in 28%. That just makes me laugh. Marriage. That's just funny to me. Anyway, for legal rights and benefits. Now, given the present climate of immigration, that would seem deal. So why people are getting married, love still wins that right there. And that's a good thing. Listen, I'm a strong proponent that you should love the people around you, and you should love the person you're going to get married to. That really does matter. In some countries, I know there are arranged marriages and things like that. But it really did fascinate me that 88% got married for love, and then 81% for making a lifelong commitment, that means that love doesn't necessarily always translate to the idea of a lifelong commitment, which is how love has changed. And I think this matters because when you look at love and marriage, we need to understand how that impacts our culture and tells us what we are. See, I don't think our greatest risk, and I'll say this several times, our greatest risk is not this climate crisis. We have a cultural crisis. That's the greatest risk. And there's more of a chance that our cultural crisis could destroy America in 12 years than our climate crisis. AOC says we got 12 years, but then again, AOC won't even denounce eating babies. But I digress. Let's talk about something else. So the other thing is that as love tops that, here's some things in that that I found interesting in why people get married. Being a good financial provider was seen as particularly important for men to be a good husband or partner, according to a 2017 survey by Pew Research Center. About 7 in 10 adults, 71%, said it was very important for a man to be able to support a family financially, to be a good husband or partner, while just 32% said the same for women. See, here's this idea. For all this conversation about men and women and equal stuff, there's still this expectation that for a man to be considered fulfilling his duty, 71% of America says that man needs to be a good financial provider. So for all that's out there being said today about women and men, the expectations are still staying in there that a man needs to be that provider. Now, I'm not saying that women can't make more than men and women aren't providers and can't be providers. I'm just saying that the expectation for our culture is that men take the financial burden. The 71% agree with that. So I'm just saying that. Number 3, the number of U.S. adults cohabitating with a partner is rising. Half of U.S. adults who are married, 7% were cohabitating in 2016. That number of Americans living with an unmarried partner reached about 18 million in 2016, which is up 29% since 2007. Roughly half of the cohabitators are younger than 35. But here's something interesting. Cohabitating is rising most quickly among Americans aged 50 and older. So 50-year-olds, that boomer age group is finding it. And here's the interesting piece of that. When boomers first started getting married, divorce was a big issue. They were getting married and then they get divorced. And now a lot of these people that are choosing to live together in their 50s are people that have been married before or have been married at least twice. And they're coming out of their second divorce and they're just not going to go through it again. And so it really does do that. Now, here's something interesting about this stuff. 54% of those in the silent generation, that means that generation in their 70s and 80s, say cohabitation doesn't make a difference in society, but 41% of them do. That means the older group saying, okay, it doesn't make a difference, but then there's still that 40% says, yes, it does. I personally think it makes a huge difference. I think that if we don't make that marriage covenant significant, it really does talk about what we believe about relationships, how love, what it means to be in a biblical marriage. I think that makes a little difference here. So, number 4, 4 in 10 new marriages involve a remarriage. So, a lot of the marriages happening today are second time. Blended families are huge. Now, here's this issue about divorce and remarriage. I don't think anybody gets married going, oh man, I can't wait to get a divorce. Now, I think there are some times where divorce jumps in there, but and I hear people say, well, God hates divorce. He does, but he also hates a lot of other stuff, and he mentions that in Proverbs. The other things he hates lying lips, slander. He hates those things. So divorce is not the unpardonable sin, but divorce creates a lot of pain and heartache, and that is affecting our culture today. And there's not a lot of success in that second marriage either. Matter of fact, they're more apt to get a divorce than those being married for the first time. So what we're seeing here is, although a lot of the marriages today are second-time marriages, creating blended families, I would just say this. you need to still understand the damage that divorce does. And that second marriage and that blended family, man, there are some people that are doing great at it, and they will tell you it's difficult and it demands more, but they're doing it well. They love Jesus, and they're putting Christ in the middle of that marriage, and it's being effective. But I would just say this, that divorce has created this detachment society. I think that's a great reason why people move around churches so much. I mean, if mom and dad weren't loyal to each other, why should I be loyal to any institution? If mom and dad weren't loyal to the institution of marriage, why should I be loyal to the institution of the church, the institution of government, institution of education? See, loyalty. Marriage teaches loyalty and longevity. And when that breaks apart, that lesson kind of goes away. And so we're missing that loyalty aspect in our society. So, the fourth thing we just talked about, 4 in 10 new marriages involve remarriage. So 40% of the people that are getting married are getting married again. Number 5, since 1967, a steady increase in U.S. intermarriage. This was fascinating to me. We all recognize, at least I do, I'm 56, that there seems to be more and more interracial marriage, which I don't have a problem with. I get asked this all the time, and just to be very candid, hey, would it upset you if your children married a person of color? And I said, well, for me, I'm more concerned about that person's spiritual relationship. I want them marrying someone who is godly. If they marry someone of the same pigmentation and they're ungodly, they're in a terrible condition. I want to know the condition of the heart. And that's the reality of what I think. I just do. I think of their spiritual integrity, their spiritual authenticity, way before I get into what color of skin they have. But in our culture, 1 in 6 newlyweds were married to someone of a different race or ethnic group in 2015. So this is a increase in intermarriage since 1967, when just 3% of newlyweds were intermarried. So it's just interesting to me. See, among Generation Zers and Millennials, 53% say people of different races marrying each other is a good thing for our society, compared to 41% of Gen Xers, 30% of Boomers, and 20% of those in the silent generation. See, here's what I'm saying. For all the talk about how race hasn't gotten better, I'm looking at this and I'm sitting there thinking, just as a young guy growing up, I mean, it just didn't happen that much, and it kind of would have been looked on and said, I'm not sure about that. But yet we're seeing from the generation, the silent generation, those born between 1925 and 1945, 20% had a problem with it. Now 53% say so. How can you tell me things haven't changed? How can you tell me that this issue of race has not become less of an issue? The only place it seems to be a real issue is in politics and identity politics, and people love to bring it up. I'm just saying, to me, this is a good indicator, a healthy indicator of how much progress we've made in handling race and differences. I mean, marriage is a great indicator, and it tells you how people are thinking and what they're thinking about. Number 6, support for the legalization of same-sex marriage. Man, this is just right here. I'd just say this. What one generation does with permission, the next will do in excess. And you see this in this. In 2007, Americans opposed legalizing same-sex marriage by a margin of 54% to 37%. In 2017, more favored it, 62%, than opposed it, 32%. See, we've changed that dynamic, and that's not a good thing. Why is that not a good thing? Because God didn't design marriage between same sex. One of the reasons God designed marriage was that we would produce children. Same-sex partners can't be productive in that way. They're not doing it. They don't procreate. Matter of fact, if that became the rule of law, I mean, if everybody, let's say everybody said, okay, we're just going to be same-sex, the only way that you could have children then is it would have to be by artificial means of how someone becomes pregnant, and that works because it can't happen naturally. And that's why it's an unnatural relationship, is what Romans 1 says it. They exchange the natural for the unnatural. And that's what it is. It's just not natural, but because it's becoming more and more accepted today. And a matter of fact, since the change of definition, since the Supreme Court changed the definition of marriage, found that about 1 in 10 LGBT Americans, which is about 10%, were married to same-sex spouses in 2017. Now, a majority of those people, 61% of same-sex couples who were living together, are now married. So 10% of those who were living together were married. Now, 61%. And again, what one generation does with permission, the next generation will do it excess, but that doesn't make it right. See, I'm telling you research. But the research doesn't make it right. I mean, it just doesn't change the fact that God never intended people of same sex to be married or to have a sexual relationship. Number 7, about half of Gen Zers and millennials say same-sex marriage, interracial marriage are good for society. Well, I would say this. I think that the interracial marriage, I don't have a problem with that. But same-sex, again, I just talked about it. It's not good for society. It's going to have incredible ramifications. Lifespan's going to be affected. It's already been proven. People that engage in same-sex marriage, they don't live as long. I mean, it's a health crisis. I think it breeds other things that brings into society. As far as I'm concerned, it's just not healthy. It's not good for a society. I mean, I know some of you say, well, that's your opinion. It is my opinion, but it's an opinion that is backed scripturally. Why would God condemn that was good for us? And he does, scripturally. He calls homosexuality a sin. Now, so you say, well, there are a lot of things that are sin. You're right. And I agree with that. And so I would take a step. Sin is not good for our society. How about that? Can we, amen. Somebody say amen. Amen. That's right, preacher. Yeah, say amen. I'm with you. Throw a hanky, throw a fit. Give me a shout right there. It's just not that way. So we need to look at that. Number 8, sizable minorities of married people are members of a different religious group than their partner, but marriages and partnerships across political party lines are relatively rare. So in other words, political views, we ain't getting married. If I will never marry a Democrat, I'll never marry a Republican. Oh, you're a libertarian? We ain't dating. We ain't talking. We're not. But now, if you're Baptist and I'm Mormon, we might could work it out. Yeah. See, it's amazing to me that political convictions carry much more weight than spiritual convictions. That Democrats and Republicans or libertarian, they are much more divided and say we can never make this work than say people of spiritual, whether it's Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, my producer was telling me of a friend of theirs that he's dating. He's a Christian, but he's dating someone that's a Muslim, and they get along just fine. I don't understand how that works. I mean, I just don't. I mean, I'm not saying that I disagree with the fact that people with the differing political views shouldn't marry. I think that's probably a smart thing. But what gets me is that their spiritual convictions, what they believe about faith, is not nearly a situation to consider as their political views. Now, as you look through all this, okay, great, Bucky, you gave us a lot of stuff there. That's wonderful. Congratulations. You can read and you can spout statistics. Well, thank you. There was a day where that was questionable about reading and statistics. What does it all mean? Well, I think first off that we're seeing that marriage has become less and less important or less and less of a factor in our society. That we keep moving away from boundaries. And I believe this in every form. Whenever boundaries go away, bad things happen. Marriage is a boundary of blessing. God created it. Marriage is his desire, his design, and his plan. Before the fall, he created marriage before the fall. He created sex before the fall and said they're good things. And go out and populate the earth. Go out and reproduce. And that was God's design, God's plan. Now, when sin got entered into the world, what the enemy wanted to do is take everything good that God had designed and God planned and made it bad. And marriage is foundational to God's plan. As marriage goes, so goes society, so goes the church. You can't have healthy churches without healthy marriages. You can't have healthy societies without healthy marriages. And when I say that, I mean that as men and women being married together. That's what I mean. That's God's plan, God's design, God's purpose, and that's key to a healthy society. That was God's decision to do. So what this tells me is that there is a deterioration of God's plan. There's less and less conviction about doing it God's way, about boundaries, whether you're talking about sexual boundaries, marital boundaries. Anything without boundaries is in trouble. I don't care. If you lose boundaries to a country, you lose the security of that country. You lose moral boundaries, then anything goes in that deal. So I'm just saying, whether you're talking geographical, whether you're talking spiritual, even in marital boundaries, boundaries are a blessing and boundaries create protection. When those boundaries go, we get at risk. So whether or not you believe marriage is crucial to a healthy society, God does. And I think that's the point you got to matter. It's not whether because anytime I come in disagreement with God, God's always going to show himself right. And that's just a reality. And we're going to see this. Every society that has watched the home become less has destroyed itself. So again, our greatest crisis is not the climate. Our greatest crisis is in our culture. And the culture of marriage right now is a huge indicator that we're in trouble. Marriage matters to God. It's sacred. It's holy. It's his plan at marriage. So I just want to encourage you, man, seek out the Lord. It is God's design. It's God's plan. And that means it's the best thing. One man, one woman, one lifetime. It's a cool thing. And love does mean lifetime commitment. So thank you so much for listening to Bucky Kennedy Podcast today. Hey, check us out. You can check us out on our YouTube channel. This podcast can be found on all your favorite listening platforms, and you can do that out. You can go to Bucky Kennedy Ministry app, download the app. You get all kind of stuff there. Rate us, review us, share us, tag us, and tell somebody about Bucky Kennedy Ministries. Listen, it's not that we get famous. It's that we want to encourage people in their walk with Christ. And we also want to introduce Christ to people who don't know him. So thank you for doing that. Give us your feedback. If you've got questions, I want to know. But anyway, thanks for listening to Bucky Kennedy Podcast. Look forward to being with you next time.